You are what you eat. It's one of those phrases we've all heard said a million times. And yet, how often do we really think about what that actually means, especially when reaching for a bag of potato chips or those Oreos hidden deep in the pantry? On a practical day to day level, it can be hard to process the stark reality that the food that we're consuming is directly related to our health and how we feel. Because in the moment, our stomachs typically override our brain, right? And that's exactly what the food industry is banking on. Because believe it or not, it's not actually our stomach that's doing the thinking. It's the part of our brain that craves the dopamine hits those chips or Oreos provide. But what if I told you there are even more shocking secrets that the food industry is keeping from us? Secrets that not only make us spend more money, but have directly created a worldwide epidemic of obesity, insulin resistance, and disease. Frankly, it's a topic they don't want us to be talking about, but on this podcast, we are not afraid to tackle hard truths. And that's why in today's episode, we're taking a deep dive into the dirtiest secrets the food industry doesn't want you to know, so you can avoid falling into their trap. Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast brought to you by Thinlicious. I'm your host, Ruth Sukup, and here we'll talk about everything from the science of weight loss to practical tips for making your health a priority in the midst of a busy life. It's a little bit nerdy, a little bit funny, and a little bit revolutionary. So buckle up, friend, because it's about to get real. Hey there, and welcome back to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast. Once again, my name is Ruth Sukup, and I'm the founder of Thinlicious and the creator of the Thin Adapted System, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. And I'm also a 46-year-old woman who knows exactly what it's like to struggle with losing weight and getting healthy. Because it is a battle I fought for so many years, constantly trying everything I knew how to do to lose weight and get healthy, one diet after another, sometimes losing a few pounds and always gaining it right back. And if you are listening to this podcast because you are right in the midst of that struggle, then you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, right? How not feeling good about your body and the way that you look and the way that you feel starts to impact your confidence and literally everything else in your life. And then on top of that, you just don't feel good. You're tired all the time. You're bloated. You're gassy. You struggle with heartburn and indigestion or chronic pain or headaches and inflammation. Believe me, I get it. And for me, it wasn't until I decided to take a totally different approach that things finally turned around. The biggest thing was that I finally stopped looking for a quick fix, right? Another crash diet, and instead decided to do real research into the science of weight loss and why we gain weight in the first place. And honestly, what I discovered shocked me because it's so different than everything that we have ever been told our whole lives about what's healthy and what's not healthy and what makes us lose weight and what makes us gain weight. Our whole lives, we have been told to eat less and exercise more and that weight loss is just calories in and calories out. But that's not true. Not even a little bit, especially for women and especially for women over 40. Because as it turns out, the thing that regulates our weight isn't calories, it's hormones. And so as I started to change the way that I eat in a way that restored balance to my hormones and reversed my insulin resistance and healed my gut, the weight just started to come off without dieting, without drugs, and without making myself miserable. I lost 40 pounds in 6 months. And for the first time ever, I didn't just gain it all right back. I've easily maintained that weight loss for years now. And why am I telling you this? Well, because after struggling with this for so long, it felt and it still does feel like freedom to me every single day. And that is why I am so freaking passionate about this work. It's why I record this podcast, right? Why I started Thinlicious in the first place, because I can't help but want to share it and talk about it and help other women find that same freedom because it's life-changing. It is life-changing freedom. And it makes me angry that not everybody has this because we have been told so many lies, right? Because it's unlocked this passion inside of me to get to the truth of what's actually going on and why so many of us are struggling with this exact same thing. And I think it's a little bit like going down the rabbit hole, right? You start to go deeper and deeper, and you start seeing all of these connections, and you start to realize that it's not just me, right? It's not just my experience of struggling with my weight. There's actually something way bigger going on, something way more sinister. And one of the biggest things, I think, is that we are all victims of a food industry that has literally been out to get us, right? Because the more that I learn about the food industry and how it works and how a lot of the conventional wisdom that we've been fed for years and years and years is actually a bunch of industry propaganda that has been carefully created to get us to buy and eat more unhealthy food, the more angry I get. It's such a huge deception, right? The wool has been pulled over all of our eyes, and it has had a devastatingly huge impact on the health of millions of people, right? Millions of people. The obesity epidemic in this country is now up to like 80% of the country is overweight. And 90% of the country is struggling with insulin resistance, rampant insulin resistance that is in turn causing all sorts of other health issues, right? From everything from type 2 diabetes to heart disease, high cholesterol, cancer, all of that can be directly linked to the inflammation that comes from the insulin resistance and the hormonal imbalance that can be directly tied to the crap that we're eating. And that's a huge deal. And it makes me mad because when you look at it and you look at how we're being lied to and manipulated by food corporations, it gets me fired up. It feels personal because if I'm going to screw up my health by eating too much and making poor food choices, then I want it to be my choice, right? I don't want to be realize that I was just a pawn in somebody else's game. I don't want to be manipulated. And yet we are being manipulated, all of us. And it has been devastating for the health of the entire country. And that's why I wanted to talk about this in this episode, right? To just lay it all out there, exactly what these food companies are doing. Because like I always say, I think knowledge is power. And understanding what you're up against and the forces that are at play is the first step in being able to make better choices for your health. I want you to walk down the grocery store aisles and see them like I do, right? With those Mr. Yuck stickers everywhere. That's what I envision when I walk down the aisles of the grocery store now, because now I see it, right? And I see the colorful boxes and the heart healthy stickers everywhere. And I think, nope, you're not getting me anymore. You're not going to get me. And that's how I want you to feel too, right? So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk specifically about the food industry and all the ways they're trying to manipulate you into buying and eating their products and the sneaky tactics they're using to get us to consume more and more and more. And then, of course, at the end, we will also talk a little bit about what you can do about it and how you can start making better choices for your health and the changes that you can make that will have a big impact, probably on your weight, but also just how you feel. But first, let's dive into the nitty-gritty and talk about the food industry, the big food machine, as I like to call it. Because let's be real, right? We live in an age of convenience, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the food that we eat. From drive-through restaurants to microwave dinners to dozens of aisles in the grocery store filled with pre-packaged and processed food products, it sometimes feels like we can't escape the reach of the food industry. And make no mistake, the food industry is a big business, right? It's not called big food for no reason. In the United States alone, the food industry is a $1.46 trillion business. That's trillion with a T. Big food controls what gets grown and what gets harvested and what gets processed and what gets packaged and what gets distributed and what gets sold in every single grocery store and market in the world. It controls what you eat, and it's probably controlling what you think about what you eat as well. And I just want to say this too, because it's important to understand that when I talk about big food, and I'm saying that in air quotes, right? I'm not talking about thousands of different companies out there that are just trying to get by and make a living like all of us are, right? Because I have respect for that. I'm a business owner. I have respect for that. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about 10, right? There are 10 massive food conglomerates that control more than 90% of the food that you see in the grocery store. And most of them you've probably heard of, but if you're curious, the big 10 are Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Danone, General Mills, Kellogg's, Mars, Associated British Foods, and Mondelez. That's it. Those 10 companies control more than 90% of the food in the world. That's it. So just right there, you have to think about the power that comes from controlling basically all of the world's food. And what is this saying, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, because ultimately, what are these companies' goals? To make more money and higher profits. So right away, you have to realize that the interests of the food companies are not in line with your interests. They want you to buy as much as possible, which means they want you to eat as much as possible, which means it is in their best interest to make their food as addictive as possible. And believe me, they are working hard, very hard, at making their food as addictive as possible. We're going to talk more about that in just a second, right? With a whole teams of scientists dedicated to ensuring that you can't just eat one, right? That's what Lay's slogan is. On top of that, as if that weren't bad enough, right? They also want to be able to produce their food as cheaply as possible because they want to make more money. So that means they're using ingredients that can be mass produced as cheaply as possible, which usually means things like ultra processed chemicals and high fructose corn syrup. The closer it is to nature, the more expensive it is. But the more fillers and chemicals they can add, the cheaper it is to produce. And this is the crazy thing, right? When I really think about this and even talking about it, like, why would we even want to eat any of that crap as we're talking about it? We would think that this would be so obvious to all of us, right? That highly processed food and artificial garbage can't possibly be good for our health or for our waistlines. That eating real food, real fruits and vegetables and meat and dairy, isn't that always going to be so much better for us than eating junk food? Well, I think it used to be obvious, but that's why the food industry had to get really creative and they had to start controlling the narrative. Basically, they had to start lying to us. They started manipulating us and they got really, really, really good at it. And so there are some really sneaky tactics that are being employed by the food industry to manipulate us into buying and eating their products and to get us to consume more and more and more. These tactics are often insidious and we don't even realize they're happening. And because I think it's so important for all of us to be totally awake about this, right? Eyes wide open and very aware of what's happening, here are a few of the most common ways the food industry is trying to manipulate you. First up is using addictive ingredients, right? And this is probably the most obvious one, but it's also probably the most terrifying. And it's the fact that the food industry intentionally adds addictive ingredients to their products to keep us coming back for more. Yes, you heard that right? They are literally adding drugs to our food to ensure that we get hooked. And the most common of these drugs is sugar. Sugar, if you don't know, is a highly addictive substance. It's been shown to have a similar effect on the brain as drugs like cocaine, right? It's as addictive, if not more addictive than cocaine. Because when we eat something that's high in sugar, it triggers the release of dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone. And that dopamine release creates a powerful reward system in the brain that makes you want to keep eating more and more of that food. That's literally the nature of addiction. And the food industry knows this. They've known it for a long time, right? In fact, a lot of the research that has been done on the addictive properties of sugar has been funded by the food industry because they've been trying to figure out how to exploit this knowledge to their advantage. Because if they can get you hooked on their products, then you will keep coming back for more. But they don't stop there. I mean, why would they stop, right? In addition to sugar, they also add other ingredients that are known to be addictive, like MSG or artificial sweeteners like aspartame. And a lot of these ingredients are hidden in plain sight, right, under names that you might not even recognize. And it's not just the processed food products that you probably think of being unhealthy, right? Of course, we know Oreos and cakes and candy bars are unhealthy, but it's also in other things that we might not necessarily think about as being unhealthy, like salad dressing or ketchup or mayonnaise or bread, right? And on top of that, the food industry basically has a secret weapon that they use to get us all hooked on their products. And that secret weapon is something that's called the bliss point. But what is the bliss point? So it's basically the perfect combination of sugar, fat, salt, and other flavors that make a food taste so good that we literally can't resist it. It's a real thing, and the food industry knows about this. In fact, they have been studying this bliss point for years, and they spend billions of dollars every single year to figure out how to make their products as addictive as possible. They hire food scientists and flavorists to create the right combination of flavors and textures that will keep us coming back for more. They even use something that's called mouthfeel technology to figure out how to make a food feel just right in our mouth so that we get that perfect sensation, right, of crunch or creaminess or whatever it might be that makes us want to keep eating. It's crazy and it's so sneaky, but you have to be aware of it because, right? Because again, it's that dopamine that's keeping us coming back for more because in the moment when you're having that craving, you're not thinking about all the crazy things the food industry is doing to you. You're thinking, man, I could really use an Oreo right now. I know, I get it. Even when we know it's terrible for us and it's literally killing us, we just keep eating it. But know that they're doing it on purpose. So that's the first thing that you need to be aware of, that they are intentionally making their crap food as addictive as possible to keep us hooked. And the best way to avoid falling into this trap, right, is to get into the habit of reading labels so that you know exactly what you're putting in your body. Just become a label reader. Always read it. And if you can't pronounce it or you don't know what something is, don't eat it. So that's the first thing. The next sneaky way the food industry tries to manipulate us is through deceptive labeling, because they basically want us to believe that processed foods are healthy, right? That all of these low fat and fat-free products they've been selling us for years are good for us, that it's better to eat a processed food full of chemicals and preservatives and artificial ingredients and artificial colors than it is to eat a whole natural food that might actually contain some fat. And honestly, this labeling practice is so insidious because it's done in such a clever way, right? But it's everywhere. It's in the packaging, the labeling of products. It's in the buzzwords that they're using, the claims that something is healthy when it's really not, or making it look healthy, using green and grains on the packaging. It's how they use marketing and psychology to actually make us believe that their products are good for us even when they're not. Frankly, food labels can be really confusing. Sometimes it feels like you need a PhD in nutrition, right? Just to be able to make sense of it all. And that's also not an accident. They're deliberately trying to make it as difficult as possible for you to understand what you're actually buying and eating. And so they do this by using really small print, hard to read fonts so that you'll just give up and not bother trying to read it. Another way they try to fool us is by using words and phrases that sound healthy, but really aren't, right? So a product might be labeled as natural or heart healthy or low fat or whole grain. And this makes us think it's a healthy choice, even when it's really not. And sometimes they'll even use other sneaky tricks, right? Like listing ingredients in a different order than they actually appear in the recipe so that it seems like there's less sugar or less of another unhealthy ingredient than there actually is. And whatever it is, right? Whatever the trick that they're using, we fall for it over and over and over again because we're busy and we're tired and we're overwhelmed and we want to believe that there's an easier way. We want to believe that we can just keep eating the same foods that we've always eaten because they're healthy, right? They're good for us. But let's be real about it. The truth is that almost all of the food in the grocery store, especially the food in the middle aisles of the grocery store, is highly processed and full of chemicals and preservatives and artificial ingredients. And almost all of it is bad for us. And the food industry knows it, but they do not care because, like I said, processed foods are cheap to produce. They're easy to make. They're easy to package. They have a long shelf life. They're easy to sell, and they're super profitable. And the result is that we keep buying them. We keep eating products that we think are, okay, maybe it's not the healthiest, but it's not that bad, right? Yeah, it actually is that bad. And this can be really frustrating because then at the end of the day, we blame ourselves for not being able to lose weight when we're eating all these so-called healthy foods, but it's really not your fault. The food industry is intentionally trying to deceive you. So what can you do about it? Well, again, read the label. Don't just look at the front of the package. Look at the actual ingredients and the nutrition information. Don't be fooled by the big, bold claims on the front of the package. The real information is hidden in the small print. And you could also try to avoid buying products with labels altogether, right? The best foods for your health are usually the ones that don't come with a label. Fresh fruits and vegetables and meat and fish, right? When you do buy prepackaged products, try to stick to the perimeter of the store where the fresher foods are kept. Oh, so that's the second thing. The next sneaky tactic the food industry uses to try to get us to eat more is by controlling portion sizes. Have you ever noticed that the portion sizes at fast food restaurants and even a microwave dinner just keep getting bigger and bigger? And it's not just our imagination. Studies have shown that when we're given a larger portion, right, supersize me, we tend to eat more even if we don't feel hungry. And the food industry knows this. And what's ironic about it is you would think that if they gave us more food, then we wouldn't eat as much, but we actually start eating more. And so then we buy more, right? If they can get us to eat larger portions, then we'll buy more of their products. And so they deliberately make the portions bigger. But there's something else that's happening with this too, right? As the portions have gotten larger, our perception of what normal portion sizes are has also changed. So now when we're served a normal portion size at a restaurant or a dinner party, it seems really small, right? You're like, this isn't enough food. I hear guys say that all the time, right? Like, that is not enough food. And we think we're not getting enough food. And this is a phenomenon that's known as portion distortion, where we end up eating more and more because our perception of what a normal portion size should be has changed. So how do you avoid this trap? Well, you can start paying more attention to portion sizes, right? There's lots of resources online that can help you understand what a healthy portion size actually looks like. And sometimes just being more aware of this can make a big difference. Okay, so now we're really going to get into it. But I think this is probably the most insidious way, right? The most insidious way that the food industry tries to manipulate us is by manipulating the science. You see, they've got a lot of money because they're huge, trillion-dollar industry, right? And a lot of money can buy a lot of influence. And so what do? They fund studies, they pay for research, and they even have scientists on their payroll, all in an effort to promote their products and make them seem healthier than they actually are. One of the most well-known examples of this was back in the 1960s when the sugar industry funded a famous study that downplayed the dangers of sugar while blaming coronary heart disease on fat. And that study was big, right? And it was really well known and it was really well publicized because the sugar industry was like, people are dying from our product. We better figure out a way to not make people hate sugar. So that's what they did. And what it did was kick off this huge backlash against fat, right? And especially against saturated fat. And what did that do? Well, that created an instant demand for highly processed vegetable and seed oils. So things like Crisco and vegetable oil and margarine, right? Which are terrible. If you listen to my episode on healthy fats, you know, those are so bad for you. But that's why because until then, everybody was using butter. Everybody's using lard to cook with, right? Which are actually healthy fats. And then, oh my gosh, saturated fat is bad. Sugar is fine. We need to have more sugar and we need to have more carbohydrates and we need to have more vegetable oils. And then as if that weren't bad enough, because this was a fake study that was directly funded and orchestrated by the food industry, it became the big thing, right? And then the American Heart Association jumped on board, which, of course, the American Heart Association was influenced by special interest lobbyists who were funded by, you guessed it, the sugar industry. And so everybody got on board with this, and that became the gold standard for what to eat and what not to eat. Butter and lard were bad, carbohydrates and vegetable oils were good, and the messaging was everywhere. And not only that, it's what they started to teach in medical schools. We got the food pyramid out of it, right? And it fundamentally changed the way that we ate. And if you go back and look at the recommended dietary guidelines from that time period, which was heavily influenced by the food industry, you'll see that's exactly what happened, right? That's when the massive increase in the consumption of processed carbohydrates and sugar and white flour and highly refined grain products came on board. And when we started to see all of these low fat and fat-free products in the grocery store. And if you look at that, when that happened, and also the how it coincides to the massive increase in the rates of obesity and heart disease and type 2 diabetes, it basically destroyed our country's health, right? That the food industry directly destroyed us, and they are still doing it to this day. And it's sick It's sick because the reality is that so much of this conventional wisdom that we've been fed for years and years and years about what is and isn't healthy has been carefully crafted by the food industry to get us to buy more of their products. And that's why I don't trust anybody, right? I don't trust doctors because they've been lied to starting in medical school. Unless they are going out there and doing their own research and really, really paying attention. Did you know that most doctors get 4 hours of nutrition information or education in 8 years of medical school? 4 hours out of 8 years. Like, that's nothing. They literally know very, very little about this. They're just taking what they've been told and they're not questioning it because they got too many other things to think about. And I don't think they're trying to be sinister, right? But it just has to make you question, where are people learning what they're learning and how do they know? Because so much of this is garbage, right? So much of what we've been told is garbage. So how do you protect yourself from this? How do you protect yourself from this kind of manipulation? Well, the first thing that you have to do is be aware that it's happening. Take everything that you hear with a grain of salt, right? And try to do your own research. When you read an article or study, take a minute to think about who's funding it or what the agenda might be. And then try to avoid products that are heavily promoted by the food industry, right? If you're seeing tons of ads for something, then step away, right? Opt for healthier, more natural alternatives. Rule of thumb, the more processed a food is, the worse it probably is for you. And the closer it is to the way God made it, then the better you can feel about it. Of course, that doesn't mean there aren't still some issues with meat, dairy, and produce as well, right? Because sadly, it's not just processed foods where the food industry plays its tricks. And the food industry owns a lot of the so-called healthy foods, right? There's the meat industry and the chicken industry, the food companies those are big food companies too. And so even the whole foods we think are healthy aren't always as natural as we believe. Fruits and vegetables, thanks to genetic modification, pesticides, fertilizers, right? Apples and tomatoes that we buy today are vastly different from what our grandparents used to eat. All these enhancements that have been marketed as ways to improve crop yields and protect against pests also reduce the nutritional value of our food and introduce potential health risks. Meat and dairy products aren't immune to manipulation, right? Animals that are raised in these cramped, unhealthy conditions and pumped full of antibiotics and hormones to promote faster growth and higher milk production, those substances make their way into our systems, potentially causing antibiotic resistance or hormonal imbalances. It's crazy. And there's so much out there. It feels like a minefield. So how do you navigate this, right? Well, becoming an informed consumer is crucial. And your best bet is to look for organic and local options, right? Wherever possible, which are way less likely to contain harmful chemicals or to be genetically modified. It's going to be hard to be perfect on this, honestly. Nobody has that many hours in the day. There's so many dangers everywhere. But eating locally, locals, farmers markets can be a great resource as they often sell produce that's fresh, minimally treated, right? So that's a great place to start. Just being mindful of where your food is coming from and how it's produced goes a long way in making healthier choices. And it's really not about perfection. It's about taking those small steps towards a healthier diet. Even some change is better than nothing. So what can you actually do to make better food choices, right? And protect yourself from all of this stuff? What changes can you actually start to make? I think there's a lot of simple changes that will make a big difference. And they don't have to be super overwhelming. It's probably easier than you think. But the first and most obvious change that you can make is to start avoiding processed foods as much as possible, right? It's the number one thing that I recommend to anyone who's serious about getting healthy and losing weight because it's such a game changer. Processed foods are killing us. And processed foods are any foods that have been altered from their natural state, right? Usually to make them last longer or be more convenient to eat. So that includes everything from frozen dinners to prepackaged snacks to things like soda, candy, right? There's different levels of processed food because it also includes things that you might not realize, right? Bread, pasta, cereal, those are also processed foods. And it even includes foods that are marketed as healthy, like granola bars and fruit snacks and yogurt with fruit on the bottom. And the reason that you want to avoid these foods is that they're typically higher in sugar, unhealthy fats, and other additives. They're also typically low in nutrients, which means that they don't provide a lot of the essential vitamins and minerals that your body needs to function properly, although a lot of foods do add in fake vitamins, right? But what can you eat instead? Well, the best thing is to focus on eating whole, unprocessed foods. That means foods that are as close to their natural state as possible. Fresh fruits and vegetables, meat and fish and eggs and nuts and seeds, and healthy fats like olive oil and coconut oil. So that's really the first step. Skip the processed crap. But another tip, again, is to buy local whenever you can. So shopping at the local farmers market or joining a CSA program, right? A community-supported agriculture program can help you get fresher, more nutritious food. And, this is great because not only are you supporting your local economy and small businesses, but it also is reducing the environmental impact of transporting food, right? Plus, local produce is usually picked at its peak, which means it's going to taste way better and retain way more of the nutrients. And when you're buying local, you have the opportunity to ask the growers about their farming practices, whether they use pesticides, how they feed their animals, all these factors that affect the quality of your food. If good local farm options aren't available to you, there are also online farmers, right, that are selling online, but they're still farmers. One of my favorites is actually some friends of mine, the Seven Sons Farm. I would go check it out. Great source for super high quality meat. But getting as much food as you can from small local growers versus the huge food conglomerates is a great step in the right direction. And then one other thing, right, is that you can try to cook food at home more often, because cooking at home is going to give you way more control over what's going into your food. You can choose those fresh and whole ingredients and avoid the unnecessary sugars and fats and preservatives that are usually found in restaurant and takeout meals, especially fast food and chain restaurants, right? If you have a great local restaurant that's cooking fresh food, it's probably fine. But if you're not confident with your cooking skills, just start simple, right? There's plenty of simple recipes out there. We have tons on our website. Go to thinlicious.com. You will find so many easy recipes that you won't even know what to do with them all. And the final step is, and I think this is something that we don't always think about, but it's actually getting support from like-minded people, actually surrounding yourself with a community that gets it and that actually sees the problem like you do, right? Not everybody's talking about this stuff. Some people, you start talking about the food industry, big food and big pharma and how they're all lying to us. And you're like, ooh, put on the tinfoil hat, right? You're a crazy conspiracy theorist. And maybe I am, but I'm okay with that because I've actually done the research. But when you get out there and you realize that so many people don't get it, right? So many people don't see it. And you want to be around people that actually do get it, right? That are actually working to make positive changes in their own life, because it's everywhere. Sometimes it feels like you're like swimming upstream and fighting against the whole world when you're just trying to do something that's better for your body. And so there's something so powerful about surrounding yourself with the right people. And frankly, I think that's one of the biggest reasons our TAS program has such a high success rate, because it's such a powerful combination of education, right? Digging into the science, but then we also give you like all the practical tools that you need, the meal plans and the recipes and the instructions. But then you also have this support of an amazing community that just gets it, right? They're right there and they're cheering you on and they're talking about this kind of stuff. And there's nothing like that. And by the way, if you want more info about our program, how you can get started, be sure, if you have not done this, to check out my free training. It's called Happy, Healthy, and Free. You can find it at thinlicious.com/happy. Again, that's thinlicious.com/happy. And with that, I guess that about does it for this episode. We are over time, and hopefully you found it insightful and informative. And I definitely hope that it inspires you to look a little more closely at the food that you're eating so you can stop being a victim of those sneaky food companies. And I will be back here very soon with another new episode.